Hello, linguists. Welcome back to episode 4C. Last time, if you recall, we went in search of pi and discovered the likely homeland of the original Proto-Indo-Europeans. This time we're going to have somewhat of a geographical episode. We're going to follow as that original group of Proto-Indo-Europeans left their homeland, spread, and divided up as they settled much of Europe and northern India and a few unexpected places. I'm hoping that at the end of this lesson you'll be able to look at Europe, as well as lands to the east of that, differently and see it linguistically, divided up into language groups and not just the countries that we're used to seeing on maps. In fact, it would be a good idea, I think, to take notes on this episode on a map. So I've included a blank country-based map for you to take notes on as we go. So today, the spread of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. You recall we posited that they lived somewhere between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea based on that evidence from the corpus of reconstructed roots, and we said what they talked about tells us what they found in their immediate environment, and that was not sub-Saharan or tropical. They did not live at the North Pole. They did not live close to the ocean. Likely they lived there. And there must have been, at some point, some gigantic argument. I imagine it was about a toothpaste cap myself, but we can't really know these things, such that they said, we're getting out of here. And then there were subsequent arguments and divisions as they spiraled their way around, first east, down into Iran, and then over first toward India. Some will we'll get to that third arrow later. And then they curved back around to the west and said, no, we're going to what will be Europe. And many more arguments ensued, and they had splinter groups diverging off from the pack and settling, and that gives rise to all of the modern Indo-European languages, as well as to many which are now extinct. So when are we talking about? Beginning with archaeological civilizations, something like 3500 BC, the migrations began. So that's 5,500 years ago, still prehistoric. By 2500, they had spread west towards what we think of as Russia, down south toward what we think of as Turkey, and well into Europe, practically down into Italy. By 1500 BC, they had crossed most of Europe, and by 500 AD, so 580, 1500 years ago, they had their full spread from the tip of the Iberian Peninsula all the way over into India, so Indo-European. Here's a map to give you a basic overview of what this lecture will contain. We're going to look at the major branches of the Indo-European languages and a few major examples of each branch. So if you enjoyed geography in school, you're going to love this lesson. And if you didn't enjoy or take geography during school, then you need this lesson. Here we go. The major Indo-European language branches from east to west, if you've got your map. First of all, Indic. This group includes Sanskrit, which was the ancestral language of India. It's the holy language of Hinduism. And Sanskrit is basically to the Asian subcontinent of India and related areas, what Latin might be to many of the languages of Europe, an ancestral language, ancestor of many of the modern languages. The Vedas, the holy scriptures of Hinduism, are written in Sanskrit. Today, you can think of Hindi, which has 600 million speakers. That's about 2.5 times as many people as there are in America. It's an official language of India. English, by the way, is also an official language of India, but that has to do with colonization. A language you should know, not the language, heck, why not? Know about at least, Urdu. You should know Urdu is the national language of Pakistan because it has 60 to 8 million speakers. That's roughly the size of Germany, Pakistan to the north and west of India. Another Indic language. And interesting, you've seen images of gypsies, people who are often living sort of on the outskirts of European towns, um, associated with fortune tellers. They fared very poorly throughout the Middle Ages and under Hitler. Uh, the gypsies are also called the Romani people or Romani people. They speak an Indian or Indic language. Of course, when you find groups of Romani or gypsies, um, they've often intertwined their language with the language of the culture that they're living in. So there's Germanic versions of Romani and Celtic versions of Romani, Slavic versions of Romani. So that is really that sublanguage has really taken on many forms, as McWhorter talks about. The Indic languages are actually grouped together. Oh, before I tell you about that, Hindi versus Urdu. Why are there two languages? And McWhorter covers this as well. There's a larger language group, which we would call Hindustani, which includes both Hindi, spoken primarily in India, and Urdu, spoken mainly in Pakistan. Those two languages, however, are very similar. And here I just want to inject and reinforce a principle that McWhorter talks about. One of your assumptions might have been before this class that each country has its own language, or maybe several languages, but that languages somehow respect those lines that get drawn on maps, those country lines. In fact, those country lines have almost nothing to do with languages. Those lines drawn on the map of Europe and Asia, those have to do with wars. Those have to do with people dividing, we're an us and you're a them. Whereas language flows and changes across and in complete, not paying any attention to those boundaries. So let's just examine Hindi and Urdu for a moment. Why is there a Pakistan? You should know this as a citizen of the world. Why is there a Pakistan? India used to be larger. It used to be a colony of Great Britain, just as America was. And in 1947, along with the act of the government which declared independence from Great Britain, from England, India also decided to split up. It's called the Partition of India. It happened in 1947, so right after World War II. And they split up along religious lines. So India has many religions, but it's mainly Hindu. However, Pakistan is primarily Muslim. So we have two countries today on our map with their two flags there on your screen, India and Pakistan. Is that because they're two essentially different groups linguistically? By no means. They both speak versions of Hindustani. And I know people who are Indian who with a little bit of practice can understand Urdu, and I've known Pakistani people who with a little bit of practice and a few other words can understand Hindu just fine. Why do they need separate dictionaries? Because they have separate identities, and that identity is based in religion, not in linguistic difference. As I started to say a minute ago, we group these Indic languages together with Iranian. That's right, Iran. You might think of Iran as being an Arabic country because it is also primarily Muslim. It's not. Iranian is part of our Indo-European family gathering of cousin languages. For a long time, its president was Ahmadinejad. The Iranians are often virulently anti-Israel. This president especially was, heard around the world calling to wipe Israel off the map. And of course, Israel is one of the United States' main allies. Iran has their own nuclear program. There's been a long history of will they submit to United Nations inspections. We're very nervous about Iran, but we speak a cousin language. If you go back further in history, you've heard of the Persian Empire. That is essentially the ancestor of modern Iran. Modern Iranian is also called Farsi. In college, that was one of the languages that I wanted to study but didn't quite have time. You should also know about the Kurds. The Iranian part of the Indo-Iranian branch, excuse me, includes Kurdish. Now, Kurdish, you don't have a country to associate with the way you do Hindi, mostly India, Urdu, Pakistan. Kurdish is a people or a group of peoples without a nation. They're spread out, as you can see in the darker color on the map below, among Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Syria, and there's long been calls for the Kurdish people to have their own country, their own representation in the world. Uh, and I have a stories meeting a Kurd. I was in Germany with students about 10 years ago, and um, we were in a laundromat at about 2 in the morning doing a laundry because we realized none of us have clean clothes. And the man running the laundromat is speaking broken German. He looks more Middle Eastern in his complexion. And my students speak a broken German of their own. And we were all trying to talk together. And we don't know how this laundromat runs. And this man comes up to us in just clothes like ours and says, "You give me the money, and then I'll make the machines go." And I'm thinking the last thing I want to do is make a fool of myself by getting ripped off by someone here in Germany in front of my students. And we say, "No, no, we're fine. We'll just put money in the machine on the wall." I said, "No, really, you," and it goes on for like 5 minutes. And eventually he points to the phone number on the wall, pulls out his phone, says, "Look, this is my phone number," in German, of course, a broken German with a thick accent. And now I just feel terrible because this is yet another person in Germany who is not an ethnically native German, who's doing his best to have a living. And then we have to sit there for the next 2 hours doing laundry with him while he stands there. So I decide we're going to make the best of it. We ask, "Where are you from?" And he says, "I'm Kurdish." And I think, oh, this is fascinating. What brought you to Germany? His people were originally from Turkey. And he said that people in his part of Turkey hate the Kurds. Think of them as beneath animals. He even told a terrible story. I think his uncle was maybe murdered by the police, at least as he said, violently, brutally. He shared his story. We shared our story. By the end of the laundry cycle, we were singing Beatles songs together in English. It was a good night. But when I think of the Kurds, I think of that man in the laundromat. All right, we've got Indic and Iranian, which is essentially one branch. On we go. Hellenic. Think Greek, although there was not just one Greek language. There were, before the modern nation of Greece, many different dialects for the many different city-states you've learned about. Athens is one of them, so think Athenian. The oldest texts in this branch would be Homer, basically the Iliad and the Odyssey, those epics revolving around the Trojan War, where the Greeks attacked and destroyed Troy. Homer's about 8th century BC. About 5 centuries BC, you get Plato and Aristotle and Sophocles, and the birth of drama as we know it, the birth of philosophy as we know it. There's also another version of Greek called Koine, and it's not located in one city-state, but it again has to do with war. Alexander the Great, you know, had a great massive empire which encompassed all these city-states and beyond, and there developed a form of Greek so that all these different regions which Alexander the Great had taken over could communicate, and it was called Koine, which means common or shared, and that is the language that the New Testament is written in. If you look at the text to the bottom right, which is a representation of a manuscript, it begins N, E-N, arche, like archaic, in the beginning. Ein is was. The O actually has an H sound, ho, and then you see Logos, except it looks like it ends in a C. Logos. That's logos, gives us logic. This is in the beginning was the word in Koine Greek. Before we move on, we should also note that just north of the modern nation of Greece is Albania, and Albanian is part of the Greek branch as well, the Hellenic branch. Moving from the Hellenic peninsula over to the Italic peninsula, or the center of the Greek Empire, over to the center of the Roman Empire, we have the Italic languages. Getting a lot more familiar to you now, I bet, right? The Italic language is basically the language of the Roman Empire. Its descendants are the Romance languages. Yes, I used to think that means that they sound very romantic to talk to your boyfriend or girlfriend in. No, Romance, its root is Roman. These are the languages which descend from Latin, the language of the Roman Empire. I include French here, as well as another version of French, Occitan. I include Spanish, as well as Portuguese, because if you look at the Iberian Peninsula, the peninsula of Spain and the west there, the principle again, that's not all one language. In fact, Portugal has carved out the west sort of 1/4 of the Iberian Peninsula, but those are not the only two languages or language forms in the Iberian Peninsula. There are many, many other dialects, or you might even call them languages, except that they all exist within the country of Spain, so they don't quite get their own dictionary. Most directly, Latin turned into Italian, and it also turned into the outlier that most people forget when they list the Romance languages, Romanian. Northwestern actually has a semester abroad program in Romania. And Romania is far to the east. It's actually in the middle of a lot of Slavic countries. And living amongst a lot of Slavic countries, this descendant of Latin has taken on a lot of Slavic characteristics. For example, in Romanian, the article a or the comes after the noun instead of before the noun. Well, how did that grammar borrowing happen? That's what all their neighbors were doing. They thought it would be cool if we match our neighbors, and so they do it as well. These all descend, by the way, from Vulgar Latin. If you hear that term, it doesn't mean rude. It just means an informal or a spoken version of Latin. By the way, this is also an important part of the story of English because French, one dialect of French, plays directly into the ancestry of English, other than just being a cousin on the Indo-European language chart. 1066 is the most important date in this entire course. Linguistically, in the Middle Ages for England, that's when France, the Norman French, conquer England. And so if you have a language tree, the French branch comes over and plows into the Germanic branch that English is on, and thus we get a huge influx of Italic, Latin, French words into English starting in 1066. Here's a layout. Oh, you can see what I was talking about. Portugal, Spanish, Asturian and Galician, Catalan, also languages within the Iberian Peninsula. Up north of the Pyrenees, Occitan used to be an entire language separate from Northern French group of languages, spoken proudly. Today, you'll still see, I've been told, OC, which is the word for yes in the Occitan languages, written almost as like graffiti on a bridge. Like, remember the Oc language, this other French language that we used to have. We didn't mention Corsican and Sardinian, the two islands that the boot of Italy is kicking, but they're in there too. And there's also Rhetoromance, which is spoken up in Switzerland, and other dots. There's Romanian over there. See how it's the outlier over there. Those are the Romance languages. You speak 7 languages, and none of them are romantic. No, sorry. Slavic now. And I'm going to give you Slavic in 3 subgroups. You can basically think the languages that sound like Russian to you, probably. So let's start with the East. Russia is the orange. That's obviously not all of Russia. Russia has what? 10, 11, 12 time zones. It's like a third of the way around the world. Huge amount of territory. Belarusian, also called White Russian, and Ukrainian together make up the East branch of Slavic. The Western branch of Slavic, you have what you want to think of as the Eastern European Slavic thinking and speaking countries. There's Polish, where the Kinsaks originated in the southern Poland. And Poland is sitting on top of two countries that when I was young were one country, Czechoslovakia. And they split up in the 90s, about the time I was in college. Those are the Western Slavic languages. If you then jump down to southern Europe, southern Eastern Europe, just above Greece, basically, you have a whole continuum of languages that was a federation. And these also, almost all those used to be one country, Yugoslavia. When I was growing up, there was Czechoslovakia in the West Branch and Yugoslavia in the South. That's a federation of people speaking similar languages. This broke apart. Oh, these people have been warring for hundreds of years. A quick story. Before I came to Northwestern in Iowa, I was in Nashville at Vanderbilt. And one of the very last things I did is I donated some furniture that I had built because we were moving. It was an earlier generation of my woodworking. And I was dropping it off at a center that helped refugees. And this was 1996-7, a year or two after the terrible genocide in Bosnia, where the Serbs and the Bosnians have been warring against each other for over a millennium. They speak a very similar language. They're ethnically related. Today, Bosnians are mostly Muslims. Serbians are mostly Christians. And so here's what happened. I donated the furniture, and I heard in the background a conversation going on. And a family speaking a Serbian, Slavic language was trying to make themselves understood. They just arrived in America. They were hoping to get some things to set up a life. And this was the summer before I came to Northwestern, 1998 it would have been. And I heard one of the boys, Renan, his name turned out to be, speaking German. So it turned out this group of people had no English, but their son knew German. And I heard him try German, and I thought, I should help. So I go over, and I communicate through the son, through German, to the people there, and I help them get some furniture. And I feel called to not just, help them out, give them some furniture. I feel called to help them get settled because I've been hearing about the terrible genocidal slaughter in Bosnia, in this ancient war going on. And I actually became friends with them. I went to their house every week for the whole summer before I came to Northwestern. And I made a deal with them. They knew no English. They wanted to learn English. I said, I'll teach you English and communicating with the son. But I said, anything you learn in English, I want to learn in Bosnian. So that's what we did for the summer. I wanted them to feel not like I have the important language and they have the minor unimportant language. I wanted to feel like they had something of value and I had something of value, and we would exchange. So I still remember a handful of words in Bosnian. Ja govorim malo bosanski. I speak a little bit of Bosnian. They told me an interesting story. Today, by the way, there are Bosnian dictionaries and Serbian dictionaries. That's pretty funny because, again, what is a dictionary? It's a way of politically saying, we're us, we're not you. And they told me a story. They said, no, we don't speak Serbian. We speak Bosnian. Very proudly, they said that. Never say we speak Serbian. Well, linguistically, we would say that they speak very similar dialects. And they told me the word for bread in Bosnian is hlijeb. Hlijeb, H-L sort of ya-e-b, hlijeb. And they said in Serbian, the word for bread is hleb. Pretty similar, right? But they have separate dictionaries. Now, they said when things were very bad, if you went to the marketplace and ordered hleb, you said chleb at a restaurant or a bakery, your life could be in danger because by saying chleb instead of chlieb, people would know your ethnicity, your religion, possibly what your ancestors had done to their ancestors, and they said it could cost you your life, what the vowel sound in that word was. So a war-torn region. Oh, they also told me that they were still upset about something that had happened in a poem that they recited part of, and it was a battle that had happened in the 1300s during the life of Chaucer. So a war-torn region. It's what we would call a Sprachbund, where that's a band of closely related dialects, but since they have different political identities, they have different dictionaries, and today different countries. So that's Southern Slavic. While we're thinking about Slavic, there's a group that is grouped along with them. So now go up to the top of Eastern Europe, to the Baltic Sea. See where we are, north of Poland, north and east of Germany, just south of Scandinavia. There's the Baltic Sea, and there are three countries up there that are called Baltic countries: Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. Two L's and an E. Two of those are Baltic Indo-European languages, which are grouped together with Slavic as Balto-Slavic. And the one that's not is Estonian. And I've also had an Estonian friend, my college roommate, Charles, who has gone on to write, we were both math majors. He went on to write books about math for Penguin Press. But he had a girlfriend who was from Estonia. And even when I was a math major, I was a bit of a language nerd. And I would listen to her talk in Estonian on the phone, and I could not understand a single word she said. No cognates. I have a bit of Russian, a bit of Bosnian, no words. Well, that's because Estonia is not an Indo-European language. There are no cognates. It's part of what we call the Uralic family. Don't get to thinking Indo-European is the whole world. There's another major family called the Uralic family, and we think it was likely in Europe even before these really, really ancient Proto-Indo-European peoples migrated through. There were already people there. And they're pockets of those original peoples. And some of the pockets include Estonia, right there. North of Estonia, also the Finnish. And if you go way down, Hungarian. And I think I told you a story about being in a Hungarian church service. Three pockets of non-Indo-European languages in Europe. Another pocket, by the way, is the Basque language, B-A-S-Q-U-E. It's spoken in between France and Spain, up in the Pyrenees Mountains. And we think they've been just hunkering out down in those mountains for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. More than 6, maybe. So Estonian, not one of the Indo-European languages. Not one of the Balto-Slavic groups. The Latvian and Lithuanian are. Getting even closer to our linguistic home, Celtic. Yes, we say K sound Celtic. It's interesting that if you had been observing this spread of the Indo-Europeans, I don't know, 4,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, you probably, and you were to ask which one will become the most prominent in Europe, which one will spread over the most land, have the most famous, well-known, powerful modern descendants, you probably would have bet on Celtic. And you would have lost all of your money because the Germans hadn't swept through yet. Today, most of the Celtic languages are either endangered or extinct. And you want to basically think the British Isles. Up in Scotland, they speak English, but their sort of ancestral language is Scottish Gaelic. In Ireland, there's an Irish Gaelic. The white space that is England used to be filled by Brittonic until a bunch of Germans got there. That, by the way, is the beginning of Old English, and that's what's coming next. And the original inhabitants were pushed largely to the west. Wales is that sort of promontory on the west of England. Welsh is a Celtic language. And Cornwall, see it down there? Do you know the clothing company Land's End? The Land's End they're talking about is Cornwall, and you'll hear spoken in Cornwall a version of this ancient Celtic language. It's not just in the British Islands, though. Part of the people from the British Islands migrated to France. That's France down there with the pink. And on the Breton coast of France, Brittany, there's still spoken a version of Celtic. The reason that this group is endangered, take Ireland. Ireland has very low corporate taxes, might even be zero. And so Ireland is the home of some huge corporations headquarters in Europe, like Microsoft, Apple, I'm not exactly sure which ones, Facebook, huge companies, tech companies, manufacturing companies. The thing is, they do their hiring in English. And if those jobs are available in English, do you think the people's grandchildren will still be holding on to Irish Gaelic if that's not where the jobs are, frankly, where the social and economic power is? Well, on we go from Celtic. Oh, by the way, Celtic still spoken by certain basketball players in Boston. Ha, not really. Now we get to the Germanic branch, and this is our home branch, Germanic. Yes, English is a Germanic language. And I'm going to give you 3 branches again. We'll start with the East Branch, which had a lot of success around the time of the Roman Empire, around the end of the Roman Empire. They were busy sacking it, but has died out now and is entirely gone. Interesting how groups rise, groups fall. The Goths, which gives us, that look that kids have today, perhaps that you have. It's a language spoken in all throughout America. Not really. You see, this is a map of the Germanic invasions of the Roman Empire, the Italic Empire. It includes the 2 versions of Goths, East Goths, Ostrogoths, and the Visigoths, as well as the Vandals, which gives us the term vandalism, which is basically what this Germanic people did to our Roman Empire. In addition to the Eastern extinct, because Danish from Denmark and Swedish are both on the same branch of the Germanic branch of Indo-European. They understand each other about 80-90%, and it just takes a few extra words and a few extra sound transformations for them to converse completely fluently. And yet we think of Danish and Swedish as separate languages, but to them, they're close enough that they can converse, one speaking one and one speaking the other. It's another example of a Sprachbund, where countries do not mean mutually exclusive languages, but rather a continuum of related dialects. All right, now to Western Germanic. And you see from the close-up of the language tree, English is Western Germanic. Here, because we're close to home, I'm going to give you another division. This is divided by a sound shift. Within Western Germanic, we have a high and a low. And this is not a value judgment, it's an altitude judgment. High, West Germanic, gives us modern German. There's a higher altitude, like in Munich. You can see the Alps from Munich. And low is the lower altitude of the Netherlands. Netherland means lowlands, right? Beneath land. They're actually beneath the water because they have to have all those dikes, or else they'll be flooded. And that gives us Dutch, and actually the language closest to English in the whole world, which is Frisian, very closely related to Dutch, one of the languages spoken in the Netherlands. And ta-da, here we are at home, English. So where are we in this group of the spiraling argument, migrations, diaspora of the Proto-Indo-Europeans? The Germanic branch, the West subdivision of Germanic, and the low dialect group of the Western Germanic languages. That's us. Here, by the way, are the Germanic languages. You are here, linguistically. Low West Germanic. Notice how Finland is not colored in blue. Well, there are 2 more which I want to add. 2 more Indo-European branches, languages. One is the Anatolian branch. These two, by the way, were only discovered in the 20th century. We knew about them, but we only figured out that they were, hey, wow, that language we know of it's Indo-European too. One of them is Anatolian. It's written in it looks like hieroglyphics. Doesn't that look like Egyptian hieroglyphics there? And its main language is Hittite. This was gone 2,000 years ago. But if you're a Christian or you've read the Bible, you have a connection to Hittite. Do you remember the story of David? David had an affair with Bathsheba and arranged to have Bathsheba's husband sent to the front lines of battle so he would be killed, and his name was Uriah. Uriah the Hittite. So that guy that ancient King David in the Old Testament, book of 2 Samuel, had killed, spoke an Indo-European language. Isn't that cool? And there's one more. Tocharian. It's hard to believe, but this Indo-European group had one splinter which went all the way into what we think of as northwestern China. You see a manuscript there. This is also way, way extinct. And the texts that we have from it include Buddhist texts. And there's an A and a B version of Tocharian. So the earliest migrations from the green Proto-Indo-European homeland would be the Hittites down into what we think of as Turkey, and the Tocharian up into what we think of, well, it's almost into China. To summarize, from west to east now, Celtic, Germanic, Italic and Greek, Balto-Slavic, Anatolian, that's Hittite, Iranian, Indic, and way over there, Tocharic. If someone can make that into a good mnemonic device, I'll give you 1/17 of a point on the next unit project. Before we're done, I love collecting Indo-European language trees. Trees or other various ways to represent all of the modern descendants of this original group. Here's some of my favorites. Very simple. Celtic, Latin, Proto-Germanic, the Greek, the Sanskrit, or Indic. It's pretty simple. This one is by time. Notice Anatolian Tocharian on the right. And you can see by lining up those triangles with the sort of circles on the bottom, at what point in time the migrations reached those areas. This one makes it all look like organic chemistry, like they have pi bonds with each other. This one, which I think of as a dandelion puff, you can find English on all of these. Found it yet? This one, which is lovely. Can you imagine a more gorgeous, like Aztec necklace? This one's not super helpful, but it does contain, see the dotted line, French into Middle English? That'll be important in our unit on Middle English. That looks like Ancestry.com. Find English. That just looks like it was created by some, early Apple spreadsheet in 1983. Not helpful. And this one. Oh, my heart skips a beat when I see this. Back when I was a math and physics major at Princeton, I had on my bulletin board this. I cut it out of, I forget which magazine it was in. Smithsonian magazine, something like that. Because I loved languages and the relatedness of languages, even then. And it won me over to the language side. So here geographically are representations of, see, now we're ignoring countries, right? This is a language map of the Indo-European languages. Notice that Finland and Estonia are wholes. See the Basque hole right there between what we think of Spain and France. See the Hungary hole right there. And that is the end of our geography lesson and the story of what happened to the Proto-Indo-Europeans, the story of the modern Indo-European languages, and our next step in the journey of English.